Hello, I'm Glenn W. Hunter, and with me is Tamika J. Carter, and together we are building girl champs. What we have for you today in this episode is pressure keeps rising. If it's not one thing, it's another between the pandemic, school, and trying to get our young people to adapt. And I am so glad we have Tamika here to bring some clarity to these issues of the day. Tamika, what say ye about pressure keeps rising? I mean, are we losing control or is this just the new normal?
I am afraid to say I think this is the new normal. When we went into this almost a year ago, a lot of people were anxious to get back to the way it should be. And I think that accepting this as normal, or at least some semblance of what normal will be, is going to be more healthy for us than continuing to go with the back and forth of what we want it to be.
Okay. Well, I mean, when you start looking at this and sort of break it down to some of the points we raised in anticipation of this conversation, you know, you start looking at things like student stress. They've been at it a while, so stress is up. And really, we've actually seen some research that was done by NBC News and Challenge Success that talks about how engagement with learning is down, and they're putting a lot of that on the pandemic. So, as we're looking at their research, I wanted to point toward our students. So, with the students you connect with, what seems to cause the most stress with their current learning experience?
Well, myself, I would say I mean, certainly just the uncertainty, just not knowing. I think when they can choose or believe it will be this way or that way, it's one thing. But when they're constantly back and forth, that produces anxiety because they're constantly having to adjust. And again, like when we talk about adjustment disorder, that's a disorder that occurs when you're dealing with something and you're not able to adjust over like a 6-month period. And so something is changing every couple of months. You're constantly adjusting, and it starts turning into what looks more like generalized anxiety disorder. So when we're dealing with kids, one of the biggest things that I'm seeing again is that uncertainty. A lot of the kiddos are just confused by the differences in teacher expectations. So especially if we have middle school and high school age kids that are going to several teachers, they are stressed because one teacher may allow late work, another one does not. One teacher may have a completely different style that is conducive to online learning, whereas another may not. So those stresses and getting used to that as they just cycle throughout each of their classes each day is a really big stressor for kiddos. Some of the things that they named in the study were just overall workload and homework. Another one is lack of sleep. Our kids are losing sleep. So one of the biggest concerns that I've noticed though is that girls are actually saying that mental health concerns are causing the stress. So what the research actually found is that girls are reporting 2 times more likely than boys that mental health concerns are causing them stress at school, or because of school throughout this pandemic. So a lot of kids are struggling. However, it is, as usual, are girls of color who are getting it the worst.
Wow. So, thinking about that, girls of color getting it the worst, a lot of stress that's been both studied and identified with that. I don't think we can completely, let that inconsistency with the teachers off the hook. And I don't blame the teachers, but they're flying by a new set of rules too in this overall ordeal. So when you start thinking about teacher expectations of the students and the inconsistencies, what are ways that the students communicate the fact that this just doesn't seem right? I mean, things keep changing too fast from class to class and week to week. How do we help our children navigate that?
As crazy as it may seem, it's going to mean our kids have to have empathy, right? One of the things I've done when I've worked with youth is ask them, how was your teacher's day? We always ask our kids when they get home, how was your day? I ask the kids that I work with, how was your teacher's day? I really like to check in with them to see if they're even aware of what their teachers are going through. So many times we put teachers in a box, right? And they're supposed to be these mechanical people that function in a perfect way. And they're not, they're humans, and they're even more human now. Right now, this has brought us all to a place where we are all having to stick together and figure this thing out. So with kids, I start with, checking in with them. Are you aware, because when you communicate with the teacher, it has to be, there's a timing to it. So you can't just pop in the middle of class and say certain things. It's kind of a way and a strategy that I work with youth to understand so that they don't come off as disrespectful or rude or belligerent, or not serious, right? Because sometimes teachers don't take them seriously, and I have to teach youth to kind of be a little more confident in the way that they are expressing themselves. But I always, they definitely tell them, have your parents in the know. Have your parents in the know. If you have to talk with an educator or another adult about something that they're doing, you definitely want to have an adult to have your back in case it does not go the way you wanted it to. Um, so those are some of the things that I've done as I'm working with young people, is just continue to teach them to communicate with adults and to advocate for themselves.
You talk about the other adults, and the school is more than just administrators and educators. I mean, you have a lot of extracurriculars that are really contributing to our students' development in schools. And again, that's not to say they're not educators in a normal sense, but these are other activities that really add life and vigor to the student as well as the school environment. How have how have our children adapted to severely limited, or even in some cases, the elimination of extracurriculars during this time of pandemic and uncertainty?
Yeah, it's how do you cheer if there are no football games?
Right.
You know, I say they are. It's in progress, right? Because I think a lot of kids aren't adapting, and that's what this data is telling us, that they are struggling. We are really seeing as this year goes on that they are kind of giving up. Some kids are just giving up.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I tell kids to do is, find enrichment activities. Sometimes just having a spark and doing something that you like to do will give you a little more energy to do the things that you have to do. So there are a lot of online platforms that are offering kind of enrichment programs. I've got a kiddo taking ballet online. There's things like coding and mechanical engineering, all of this stuff online. So those are one extracurricular activity they can kind of use to replace what they're missing out on at school. Some schools are doing an amazing job of creating social circles or affinity groups, for kids, so that they can just dialogue, whether it's about a specific topic or just a space to not be focused on curriculum, and allow the kids the freedom to kind of converse with one another. Um, so again, something else I tell people is make sure your kids are going outside. It's so easy for kids to just get cooped up in the house and stay in front of the screen all day. So especially if you're working with a kiddo who has ADHD or ADD, you want them taking breaks throughout the day. You want them to go out, walk outside, take some exercise, a couple jumping jacks or something, just to kind of get their stuff flowing. Um,
Mhm.
Lastly, of course, affinity groups and class. Class is the group that I offer. So that's something that they can join if they're a girl. They can work with us weekly, and they are led by myself on different topics that help them to build resilience and recover from any mental health issues that they may have been suffering with.
I see. Okay. As you're talking about sort of the extracurricular activities and the different ways that they're able to interact, there's a sense of variety. However, with that variety, you have to look at the teachers as well. I mean, there's still that side of the equation that really plays into it. So, the question comes, how do responsible adults in the school system, for example, a teacher, counselor, administrator, as they're going through their changes, they're managing their own trauma. How do they promote hope on the horizon for the students under their care?
Self-care. I know if we're not sick of hearing that word, right? Self-care. Before you get to a place of crisis, protect yourself and prevent that by doing things that take care of your mind, body, and spirit on a regular basis. Some people do yoga, some people meditate, some people run, I kickbox. Do what you got to do on a regular basis. One of my clients I've worked with, I said, you've got to schedule the time and then you actually have to protect the time. That's two separate things, right? So you have to schedule the time for your self-care and then you have to protect that time. If that means getting a sitter, if that means, waking up early, if that means making sure you cook dinner early or late, however, you have to protect that time for your self-care because a lot of times teachers, adults, anybody is basically saying, I'm gonna do better. I'm gonna do better all the time. People are always saying, I'm gonna do better, but weeks go by and they never spend time protecting or building themselves. And so what happens is they crash.
Mhm.
So one of the things that they have to do is first just be aware, be self-aware, recognize your signs, symptoms, triggers, things that are different with your body, things that are like maybe sleep issues, things that just kind of show you something's off here. If you're responding differently in interpersonal dealings and maybe you're a little more irate than you typically are, if your focus is slipping out the window, those are things that's kind of showing you that you might be in a kind of a trauma state or that you are at least impaired in some way in your mental state. So start there. The second thing is to cope, right? Cope, don't stuff. I always say that because a lot of times we think we're coping with something and we're saying we're over it. I'm over it. But it's not about being over it. It's about going through it. So don't stuff it down and jump over it and just try to keep running because you're going to be running with a broken leg. So instead, go through it, whatever it is you're dealing with, whether it's race stuff, whether it's, loss, grief, go through it, get with a professional, talk to someone that you can trust and actually work it out, but don't try to avoid it. That is so toxic and it really causes lower productivity as well as just more bad feelings. So that's some of the things that I would say do. I also offer groups for adult women. Teachers are welcome, anyone helping professional, because I know that right now we're all carrying a very special burden of being helpers to other people who are going through difficult times. So I will be having that information on my website so that you can check it out and get enrolled in one of those groups as well.
Outstanding. So, specifically at this moment in time, what's next for the students with whom you get to engage for the remaining school year?
Oh gosh, we've got 3 months left. I think most of us, it's about 3 months left, unless the year's been extended in some way. For myself, yeah, first off, we'll just say my own kids is to get them through, right? And I think that's where all the parents are. Get these kiddos through, whether they're a senior or first grader. So that's it, getting them through. If through means failing, passing, whatever, as long as they're happy and healthy, it's really getting them through. I mean, I talked about it before when this pandemic started. I said, I think we really rushed to getting kids back to school because we were so focused on instruction. And we really didn't look at these things. There's an entire list of stuff that is stressing these kids out, specific classes, wondering about college. Kids, 40% of kids are reporting that they have decreased sleep. Kids aren't sleeping. They don't have any, they don't have anything to exert energy. Their minds are just sitting here staring at these screens. And so they can't even sleep. So that's what's next for me is continuing to work on things that help youth in the individual sense, and then also having and holding support groups for young ladies so that they can just have a place to talk about this stuff. So that's really where I am. I think it's a hard thing to say. I mean, even as we look at the leaders of our country right now, it's hard to say what's going to happen from day to day. But I plan to continue to provide that space for youth, for kids, for girls, for women who are supporting young girls, and for professionals as well, so that they can just decompress because that's what we really need right now.
Tamika, I think it's simply outstanding that you're doubling down on your ability to transform lives with the skills you have and the knowledge you're willing to share. However, all of that goes for naught unless you explicitly and clearly tell us, how do we reach you?
I can be reached on my website. You can go to tamikajcarter.com. That's TAMIKA If you go there, you can book a free consultation to talk about any of these things. If you go to the class page, you can actually sign yourself or your daughter up for the programs that are focused on girls and women. I would love to see you, love to work with you, and I'll talk to you soon.
Outstanding. I'm Glenn W. Hunter. Once again, our subject matter expert, Tamika J. Carter. And as we go back out into the world trying to impact well, our community and our youth through these perilous times. I want to encourage each and every one of you singularly, uniquely, purposefully, be safe. Thank you.
Adios.